Welcome to another episode of Daily Airline News. My name is Jeffrey Thomas and I'm joined by my co-host Richard Godfrey in Frankfurt. Good morning to you, Richard.
And good afternoon to you, Jeffrey.
And our very special guest, ex-US Navy, Royal Australian Air Force and Qantas Top Gun, Kevin Sullivan in Sydney. Good evening to you, Kevin.
Good evening, Jeffrey. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. Viewers, Kevin was the captain of the infamous QF72 in October 2008. And it would prove to be his greatest challenge in aviation as he fought for control against the confused and erratic computers on the A330 he commanded. He's the author of an outstanding book, No Man's Land, the story of the QF72 accident and the aftermath of his ordeal. There's a link below to Kevin's book in the description, and I can absolutely assure you it is an outstanding piece of work and a real thriller. So, Kevin, can we start off with you? Can you tell the viewers how a US Navy Top Gun pilot came to be flying with Qantas?
If I came to Australia at the invitation of the Royal Australian Air Force in 1983. The RAF was transitioning to the F-18 Hornet from the Mirage 3, and they requested this personnel exchange with the U.S. Navy. And so the U.S. Navy has always had, or previous to this, has had an exchange program with the A4 when the Melbourne was still active. But I was the first Navy pilot to join the tactical flying wing of the Australian Air Force at Williamtown flying, and I flew the Mirage. And my role was as a fighter combat instructor there.
Oh, wow. That's the French lady, they call it, don't they?
Yes, a very fast and very dangerous airplane. That's for sure.
Yeah. And so then how did you transition then to Qantas?
After that that exchange program was completed, that assignment, I decided that perhaps I should try and stay in Australia if I could find suitable employment. And at that time, Qantas were the only ones that were interested in me. So I joined Qantas in August of 1986 and flew for 30 years with them.
Fantastic. Now, Richard, we have a series of questions for Kevin, serious questions. Can you lead off?
Sure. Just to comment on Kevin's book, though, it should come with a health warning. Once you get into the book, you can't put it down. And
Yeah.
I stayed up half the night reading it. It's a fantastic book, Kevin.
Thanks.
Coming to QF72 and the what is politely called an in-flight mishap by the ATSB. I think it's a bit more than just a mishap. But you were flying from down to Perth and along the coast of northwest Australia. Everything was fine. And then all of a sudden, the autopilot disengages, the nose pitches down, people experience negative G, there's alarms going off, master caution, master warning, loads of failure messages. And then 2 minutes later, it all happens again. How do you stay cool in such circumstances?
Yeah, certainly a very messy and potentially it was life-threatening experience. The ATSB have classified it as an accident because of all the serious injuries to my passengers and crew. So, of course, Qantas never had an accident, but yeah, this is an accident due to the amount of injuries on board. But as you know, I'm a naval aviator, as Maverick would say, and I was trained. I was trained to take off and land on aircraft carriers, and as a fighter pilot, I was trained for combat. So every time I went flying was a challenge. And every sortie I did, there was always going to be a potential for danger. And my return airfield was bobbing up and down in the middle of some ocean somewhere. So you learn very quickly, even during your training, you are trained to overload by your instructors from the first flight you ever do. And so that has been always my fallback position, that I've I've experienced that training, extreme training, and also the extreme operations flying off the aircraft carrier. And of course, Top Gun is also a very high intensity and also potentially dangerous school, even though Hollywood doesn't portray it. Well, I guess they do, because Goose unfortunately meets his demise. But yes, it's my experience is extreme. My training is extreme, and I know how to manage myself in those situations.
Kevin, can you describe the sequence of events that led up to this accident?
The it was a nice day in Singapore when we met in the lobby. I'd met the other two pilots, Peter Lipsit, who we may see later, and my second officer at the time, Ross, who is still flying in Qantas, so I'll just use his first name. But we had 9 cabin crew. We were supposed to have 10. One of them went sick that day, so they sort of won the lottery, I guess, for being too not fit for duty. And 3 pilots, because our tour of duty was to fly to Perth, offload our passengers and cargo, get a new batch of passengers and cargo, and fly back to Singapore. So it was a long tour of duty. That's why we had 3 pilots. And when we took off out of Singapore, weather was fine, daylight, a few little thunderstorms over Indonesia, which were easily avoided. And then I had a break, crew break. And when I came back to the flight deck, I could see the coast of Northwest Australia. And we were in calm conditions, no cloud, no turbulence. And that started the sequence. I jumped in my seat. Ross, the second officer, went to the toilet for a toilet break, and he was going to come back and sit in the right-hand seat as in-flight relief. Peter gave me a briefing of where we were, how our fuel consumption was going. He goes, and Learmonth is right there. And so he pointed out the window, and I could see in the general direction that was our closest emergency divert field. So I excused him. I was strapped in, and I was alone on the flight deck for about a minute before Ross came back in. And when he sat down, strapped in, I said, Ross, no changes. And then the autopilot disconnected. That's not a serious thing. We have 2 autopilot channels. So I I engaged autopilot 2. And then we started getting stall and overspeed warnings. Now, I know they're not real, because I can look out. I can see the horizon. Nothing has changed in the environment or in the airplane's configuration or operation. So immediately I know they're false. However, I didn't realize that those warnings are serious to an Airbus. And as it turns out, they activate what we call flight envelope protections in a fly-by-wire Airbus. So I had autopilot 2 engaged. Now my tapes on my primary flight display for altitude and airspeed are jumping up and down. This is unreliable speed. I identify that. There is a memory checklist that we activate for that. And the first thing is disconnect the autopilot. So I did that. I was hand flying now. And as it turns out, for the next 50 odd minutes, I was hand flying. And at altitude, that's pretty twitchy, even though the flight controls are blended, they're called, but still very twitchy. And so I'm lightly have my fingers on the side stick. I then instructed Ross to get the first officer back to the flight deck because I know these are air data issues. They're going to be complicated, and I wanted all hands on deck, basically. So
all hands on deck.
That's it.
And when you had these audible stall and overspeed warnings, but you knew you weren't in a stall and you weren't in overspeed, it must have felt very strange. Was it immediately apparent what was happening?
No, I knew it wasn't generated by the pilots. So what else can it be? It can only be the computer systems in the Airbus that are looking at something that we can't see. And in the process of getting Peter back to the flight deck, and of course, I'm just hand flying. I'm not concerned because there are no warnings or cautions in the manufacturer's operating manuals to say, if you get these warnings, the plane is going to move. And I don't think they're still there even to this day. But yeah, they will move. It can move. And because the flight envelope protections, the flight control computers are there to keep the plane safe. And these protection modes, flight envelope protections, are the way that they do it if the plane is outside normal operating limits. So in the course of calling the forward galley to get the first officer back to the flight deck, I felt the nose dip a little bit, and I had a bit more firm grip on the side stick, and then the plane pitched down. There's no warning. It's no warning to say, hey, you know what, Kev, I'm going to pitch the nose down because we're stalling. Mm-hmm. But we're also overspeeding. So why would you pitch the nose down? Anyway, the nose pitched down. I pulled full backstick. The negative G acceleration, not just weightlessness, we were actually accelerating upwards. We had to both, Ross and I both had to brace ourselves against the instrument panel, and I had full backstick. Now, I'm locked out. There's no response in stopping that pitch down. So I released the pressure on the side stick. Now, this is, again, part of my Navy experience for out of control flight. If you're not in control, you neutralize the controls is the first thing. So I released the control pressure, and then all I can see in my windshield is the Indian Ocean. And I'm going, for a nanosecond, I'm thinking, is this where my life ends today? Like this? Because I'm pulling back, nothing's happening, I'm not stopping it. And will we just continue to be blocked and go into the ocean? I didn't know. So for that nanosecond, when your brain comes to the conclusion you're in a life-threatening situation, the fight or flight body response kicks in, and now we're physiologically impaired. So as it turns out, the neutral response, or neutralizing the controls, sent a neutral signal to the flight control computers. How many people would have held that stick back in full back deflection, meaning give me full nose up in startle factor, and when the computers decide, okay, we're going to give it back to the pilot, oh, he wants full backstick. So having done this, now we're going to do this. So by neutralizing, it's a neutral command to the flight control computer, and we were just in a shallow, then a dive. So Ross says, what the bleep was that? And I said, it's got to be the prim, and the prim is the primary flight control computer, because on an Airbus, the pilot is not directly linked to the control surfaces. You're linked electronically to the flight control computer, and it's the flight control computer that moves the control surfaces. So anyway, we stabilized the plane. I knew people were on the ceiling. There was We could hear the passengers screaming and crying. I felt heard the cargo canisters slam up against the floor of the plane, and it was pretty loud. And so I know people are plastered on the ceiling. So the recovery I tried to do was as ginger as possible, as light on the controls as I possibly could to reestablish positive G. But as it turns out, the flight control computers had already done that by stopping that negative G pitch down and then bringing the nose to a neutral position. So reconfiguring.
So you were kind of observing the computer fighting with the computer and staying cool, and the neutral finding of the side stick was the key to it.
And that's instinctive to me because I'm a fighter pilot and we routinely fly to the edge of the envelope or beyond. So if that's the case, that is the procedure to at least not go any further and make it worse, either to stall the plane or to spin it. So I had specific training for out of control before I flew the F-14. So, and I was a spin instructor as a basic flight instructor as well. So I'm well versed in flying at the edge of the envelope, but this was something different and certainly got my attention, especially since I thought we might actually fly into the water. So climbing back up to 37,000 feet, we reconfigured the plane. I'm still hand flying. You can go into the ATSB report to see the sequence of all the messages that at that initial point were displayed and that we could interact with. But once we reset one of the primary flight control computers that had faulted, the warnings and cautions, everything started again, and it pitched down again. So by this time now, I'm in startle. I'm in fight or flight. Ross is in fight or flight, and we have to get out of that physiological fog, basically, of focusing, because you can get into you can hold your breath. All your blood flow is going to your extremities, which means out of your brain. And there's all sorts of things that that happen in fight or flight. And we had to get out of that. I had to get myself out of it, and I had to get Ross out of it too, because I need him. He's my co-pilot at this stage. So we were able to do that through some deep breathing and focus then on standard operating procedure to reconfigure. But that was, from the first pitch down to the second was about just under 7 minutes, or 5 minutes. So all hell has broken loose in 5 minutes. And, but we're not out of the woods because we don't know what's happening. Now we're trying to interact, and now we're getting cycling caution messages. A message would come up and flash, and then it would disappear, and another one would come up and disappear. And each time we would get a master caution, ding, ding. Plus we're getting stall and overspeed warnings. So you can imagine, I don't know if you can imagine how distracting and loud the flight deck is now with all these warnings and cautions going off. We tried to cancel them. We couldn't cancel them. So they continued for the whole flight after that. And even on the ground, as it turns out.
That's like one of the Qantas technical pilots describing. He said, "We don't want our cockpits to look like a Christmas tree on New Year's Eve." And it sounds like that's what you had, a Christmas tree on New Year's Eve.
Well, it was, automation is a crew member now.
Yeah.
And it's got to be a good crew member, but we had a bad crew member. And this crew member was pretty psychotic, as I've described before. And it wouldn't communicate with us. It wouldn't cooperate with us. Wouldn't tell us what was happening. It was looking at some other values of air data that we couldn't see. All those operations are transparent to the pilots, but the computers are communicating with each other, taking in raw data from all the probes, digitizing it, sending it to all the user systems, and we don't see any of that.
So that's when you now declared a Mayday, Kevin, and diverted to Learmonth.
Well, we eventually got Peter back up to the flight deck. He was injured, as it turns out, and we did a quick seat swap between Ross and Peter. He jumped in his seat. He almost slipped onto the center control column or center instrument panel because all our flight library charts, which were paper at that time, those big Jeppesen manuals, had catapulted up into the ceiling, and the binders had opened, and all those charts were behind on the floor, behind the two pilots' chairs. So when he came in and he was moving it with purpose, he almost slipped and was able to control his body and get into the seat. And at that time, he basically said, "I think I broke my nose." And I said, "Congratulations, strap in. We're in trouble." Now, my leadership style is pretty flat and laid back, but people know when I'm serious, and he knew I was serious. When I say we're in trouble, I've never said that before in any flight I've ever been in 40 years. So he said, it's a shit show out there. Do you want to declare a Mayday? And I said, okay, declaring a Mayday means I'm mobilizing every asset on the west coast of Australia. So I wanted to make sure it was justified. So we declared a pan first. Ross was calling to get a damage report from the cabin. And that's where Diana Casey, who was coming back from Singapore on holiday, who was also injured, she picked up the phone and gave us the information that we needed, saying there was broken bones, lacerations, spinal injuries, damage in the cabin. I said, okay, that's enough. Mayday. And that started the whole sequence of diverting now to Learmonth. And Learmonth was just outside our left wing. And we all determined that we didn't know what was happening. We had to get medical attention, even though Learmonth doesn't have a large hospital or Exmouth, but we also didn't know what the plane was going to do. So we diverted to the nearest field, which was Learmonth, to seek medical attention and get the plane out of the sky and onto the ground so that it couldn't do that again. But that we would have had to have flown for at least another hour and a half down to Perth for that.
So, Kevin, one of the things that really impressed me from your book was you basically designed a flight test procedure on the fly. And you decided to take the aircraft down to 10,000 feet and then try out how the aircraft behaved before you then proceeded for the landing, the emergency landing at Learmonth. I find that incredible. How did you come up with that idea to test the aircraft on the fly?
Well, once again, this goes back to my military training. In a single engine plane, jet airplane, if it's acting up or it's flamed out, this is what we call a single engine flame out approach and landing, or a precautionary engine out landing. So we do practice that, even practice it in the Mirage for the same reasons. So that's in my toolbox of which I was rummaging around everywhere to find how am I going to, in that period, I was strategizing, how am I going to land this plane? And, first things first, we have flight control issues. I need to know if the plane's going to let me slow down, if the plane's going to let me extend the flaps, etc. So that doing a control check at 10,000 feet is also part of a battle damage assessment as well in my military training. So 10,000 feet, you do it just in case you can see how slow you can get before you try and land or come aboard the ship, etc. So I was setting myself up for those two, using those two bits from my experience to set up for the type of landing I had devised, which was the engine out, single engine, the flame out approach.
Yeah, that's really great, and thank goodness you had the military training on top of your Qantas pilot training to be able to think and develop such a strategy. So moving on to the initial investigation, what were the results? What did they find out?
And initially, Jeffrey, I hope you post a link to the ATSB report.
Yep, we will.
This report took 3 years to complete. It's very thorough. It's very objective. They looked at everything. It's got to be one of the best, if not the best, accident investigation and report anywhere. And so, initially, they have everything they need, because who's the best witness? The flight data recorders, the black boxes. We preserved the information on both of those boxes or recorders. They viewed those. They reviewed the data, and they, in conjunction with Airbus, determined that the pilots hadn't moved the controls to cause this, that they could see that the plane was reacting to something. The tail was being moved in response to something that the flight control computers were looking at. And so initially it was, there's bad data there. It's coming from this unit, which is in air, the ADIRU1, Air Data Inertial Reference Unit 1. There's 3 of those, but ADIRU1 was pumping out bad extreme values of angle of attack, which is basically nose position relative to the air mass. So, and then a week after that, Airbus came out with an interim procedure also to deal with any similar occurrences. But that was just the initial assessment by the ATSB and Airbus. But it would take, as I said, 3 years to complete that investigation.
So what about the final report, Kevin? What was the final, the sum up of it all after 3 years?
It was a little bit disappointing because they didn't actually pinpoint what had happened. And when I was being briefed by them before they put it out, and I said, "You're telling me that you can't find what exactly happened?" The ATSB report goes into all that investigation and experimentation, etc. But basically, there were two failures. One was in the ADIRU that was pumping out extreme values of angle of attack and labeling them as valid. So it was basically saying, I'm okay, and we're at 50 degrees angle of attack. That was being sent to the flight control computer. The flight control computer now goes, hey, that's pretty extreme. I better test it. And the algorithm in the flight control computers was also flawed. And it passed the test and said, yep, it's legit. So now I'm going to activate, in the first pitch down, 2 protection modes. One was for angle of attack, and the other one was for high pitch up or high Mach anti-pitch up compensation mode. And I said, what's a compensation mode? And how many are there on board? There's nothing in the manuals that says these things exist, but they do exist. And angle of attack was 4 degrees of elevator movement. The anti-pitch-up compensation added another 6 degrees in summation, which, again, I didn't know they could gang up and stack up and move. So we had 10 degrees of elevator movement, nose down. 14 degrees is the maximum. So at 37,000 feet at Mach decimal 82, the plane or the flight control computers commanded the tail to deflect 10 degrees. And that's enormous up there. There's a lot of energy, and that's what generated all the damage in the first pitch down. So
you had basically the ADIRU delivering to the primary flight computer bad data, but saying it was good. And I was taught when I developed primary flight computers to always do plausibility checks on data coming in from other systems. So you do a simple check, is it within the nominal operating range? But you also do temporary checks over time. 5 minutes ago you said we're flying level. Now you're saying we're going, 50 degrees up. That can't be. And you reject on the basis of your plausibility check. But here there was a software check missing, and they then put that in after the event. But this event happened again, didn't it? It happened on another Qantas flight from Perth, and then there was a third flight where it happened. So obviously they didn't get it right initially.
Well, they did, but first of all, the everything you're describing as far as the checking and the development and the construction of these algorithms and the computer systems are heavily tested, but this is a man-made system and it's a computer system. So is it infallible? No, but they tested as much as they could. And unlike the 737 MAX, where they knew things were not correct, and they still pumped that airplane out into the operation. I don't think Airbus, I think they went through the whole process, but this was just the perfect storm of these two holes in the Swiss cheese lining up, and we flew right through all the redundancy, all the software, all the checks and balances that you're describing, because it was defeated for our flight, unfortunately. And so, yeah, the ATSB report goes through that whole analysis. And I was just reading it over the last 2 days again, just to familiarize myself. And they talk about that testing before and after. So, yeah, it was just luck of the draw, and fate tapped us on the shoulder.
Now, the media, Kevin, had a field day with this, and a lot of that speculation revolved around the Harold E. Holt facility near Exmouth, and they suggested it might be responsible. What was your view on that speculation?
Well, I believe that's the very low frequency communications center that is used to communicate with intercontinental ballistic missile submarines. And so if they had been asked, if the Navy or the US had been asked for data about that operation and the frequencies and all, I don't think there was any way they would give that up. It's to be top secret. And so that's number one. But number two, if Harold E. Holt was that active and destructive, potentially destructive, then every plane that flew past would also experience something like we did. So and the ATSB and also Qantas actually tested that theory, and it was not valid to say that that was a potential cause for what happened to us. So yeah, I dismissed it, and but yeah, there's no way that the U.S. Navy would, even if it was an issue, and there had been many other airplanes, then probably there'd be some safety of flight issue there, but there aren't. So yeah, and actually QPA, also listed in the report, in 2006 had this occurrence. Not the EBC, is that the one that you identified in your questions? But QPA, the same unit, had similar initial messages and bad behavior of the autopilot, being disconnected, etc. But the one thing that was in their favor was that they looked up and saw that ADR1, which is part of ADIRU1, the light was fault light was flickering. So they secured that, and by securing it, it alleviated the wild ride that we had. Yep. We had no indication that way. If we had, and believe me, we looked at that panel 100 times between the three of us, and there was nothing indicated with ADR1 that would have guided us to turn it off, basically, or deactivate it.
Yeah. One of the things pointed out in the ATSB report was that there were these different incidents. There was also another incident with a Boeing 777, and they had a certain commonality. They happened in the same area, in the same time frame, but they were actually different ADIRUs from different manufacturers. There's Northrop Grumman, there's Honeywell, there's Thales, and the Boeing 777 had one system. You had on the Airbus another system. So you got similar kind of effects from different manufacturers' systems. So it doesn't, to me, point to a common occurrence which relates in any way to the Harold E. Holt facility. It seems to me to be a more general issue, and there's a lot of airworthiness directives and service bulletins about electromagnetic interference in general. You know, from everything from a massive communication facility or cosmic rays right down to your mobile phone. And I think there's a lot of concern in general about ensuring computer systems are not interfered with by electromagnetic interference.
Yeah, again, I think the ATSB went through extensive post-incident testing to basically say that was not another issue, that the units were protected, the wiring is protected, etc. So I don't know how you would record that it was cosmic rays or another particle interfering with the operation of the outer room. So again, I'm satisfied that that was not part of the issue as a result of the ATSB testing. But yeah, I'm pretty sure they're pretty resilient. The 777 that you described, that was a Malaysian 777, and
that's right.
I think that went down to a hardware issue within their unit, so that's what caused their wild ride. But yeah, it was just it's coincidence, I think, that they all happened in that area. But yeah, I'm satisfied that it was not a cause.
Yeah. I think the more general question is, have we learned the safety lessons from QF72 and the wider question of the relationship between automation systems on an aircraft and the pilots and the pilot's skill. And I'm a great believer that the pilot should always be the final authority, and always the pilot in command has the final word and not the automation. What are your views on the lessons learned out of QF72, Kevin?
Well, I think at the time there were 600 A330/A340 models flying around, some with the Northrop Grumman or the Lytton, which it was the original producer, and Northrop Grumman absorbed Lytton, and the Honeywell. Qantas changed all their Ataroos to Honeywell subsequent to that, and there haven't been any issues. So that's the one, I guess, one fix for this. But how much automation is appropriate? Do we continue to automate? It's an aid to pilots. It's not a replacement for pilots. And as we're seeing in the European aviation circles, the EASA and the manufacturers, Airbus, studying the feasibility of taking one pilot out of the seat during cruise because the automation is so good. And now you're replacing a crew member with automation. And I think most pilots, this one included, are opposed to that. And also, I don't think, at least while I was still flying up till 2016, we did not do any specific training to deal with these types of air data and automation failures, which are extremely complex, extremely complicated, and they generate cascading failures, and they can be overwhelming. With an engine failure, the conventional failures, engine failure, hydraulic failure, wind shear, flight into terrain. We have modules to train, simulator modules that are used for training to those failures, but we don't have modules for automation failure. And I think it wouldn't be that hard to generate, but it seems perhaps a bit of stubbornness to say, well, yeah, it can fail, but we don't want to talk about it. So we'll just work on, as Airbus did, we fixed all the algorithms, we fixed the components, and so, yeah, it's fixed, no problem. And as I don't know about the A350, I know they have a lot of angle of attack probes. And of course, the probes on the front of the airplane are going to be the weak link in any automated system, whether it's a Tesla or whether it's an airplane. Those probes can be damaged, they can be blocked, they can ice up, they can even have a wasp nest being developed inside of it that will affect the airflow. And instead of rejecting the sensors are dumb, basically. They're not going to say, oh, I've got a wasp nest in my pitot tube, therefore I'm inactive. So this has happened up in Brisbane, and it just says, okay, I'll just take that information and I'll digitize it and I'll send it out. So the probes are still dumb. Nobody's developed smart probes to say, hey, I'm not okay, and therefore I better take myself out of the equation. So I would like to see, and I would hope that these failures, and there's been plenty of them, for them to say, okay, let's prepare the pilots, because we're still there. We're the last line of defense to save the day, not the automation. And so the pilots need to be trained to deal with these sort of things. And I'm not so sure they've been adequately prepared.
Yeah.
When you
Sorry, Richard. I'm just about to say we're going to be running out of time. So if you've got a very quick question, Richard, and a very quick answer from Kevin, we can do it.
Good. Well, let me be quick.
Okay, be quick.
I will try to be quick.
Kevin, when you landed safely after this incident, I think Pete printed out the 27 maintenance messages that were received, and you had only 10 of those were displayed. There you go.
Here it is.
And then there was a sort of a eureka moment. If I had that information during the flight, I would have known what was going on.
Yes, and again, it goes into how the system works, what it classifies as a class 1 or a class 2 or a class 3 message. Class 1 is displayed to the pilots. Class 2 and 3 are captured by the central maintenance system computer. So that's what we saw when we looked at it, and it just kept printing stuff out. And I was just blown away, and we all were. And then we started reading this. At one time marker, we have 10 simultaneous failures. 2 minutes before the first pitch down, 10 systems faulted and were recorded. And then after that, it was the waterfall of failures. So my comment to my pilots was, I think we're pretty lucky that we're here on the ground now, which, by the way, the stall and overspeed warnings continued once we had landed until we actually had to go into the equipment bay and pull circuit breakers to stop the warning system, the flight warning system, from activating. So when I talk about psycho automation, this is it.
Okay.
Absolutely in spades. And that will be a great segue, Kevin, to the next episode with you, which you've agreed to do, and hopefully with your former co-pilot as well, which would be absolutely fantastic, because I'm sure the viewers and Richard and I would love to, get our heads around how many failures that you were dealing with, and at the same time you didn't know you were dealing with some of them. So it's an extraordinary story.
Yes, yeah. There's a lot to be harvested from this story, and I think Peter has a lot to add as well.
Yeah, and I think one of the other things, very quickly, while Airbus is pushing this, we only need one pilot and crews, and some people are saying we only need one pilot full stop. The issue for me is I don't believe passengers will ever accept it, and I think that's one of the things that I think that. If passengers are aware that they've only got one pilot, they'll say, well, I'm going to fly on an airline with 2 pilots, and that's all there is to it. So hopefully that's the circuit breaker for this sort of thing. But Kevin, thank you so much for your time today. It's been just wonderful to be working with you on this. Richard, thank you for your time today.
You're welcome.
And viewers, thank you for tuning in. We're going to be coming back with Kevin in probably sometime next week to explore more about the automation cascade that or craziness that Kevin was dealing with. And so please subscribe to us, please like us, please keep those wonderful comments coming, and questions for Kevin and Richard and myself. Well, let's have some, and we would also try and answer some of those as well when we do get back with Kevin sometime next week. So thank you very much for tuning in, and have a great weekend coming up. Thank you.